this fundamental notion that those who are feeling financial stress are younger Australians, and while it's not the case that all older Australians are wealthy, on the whole, on average, older Australians are much more financially comfortable, and we're seeing that gap widen. But what we knew even before the pandemic was that young people were pulling back, young people were finding it harder, and the cost of housing has a large role to play in that, but also the fact that young people, the gap between how much wealth they have and how much wealth older Australians have has been growing quite materially, which means they don't have the same buffers to fall back on.
In a recent speech, you pointed out that there are definite structural reasons behind this, that there are a number of policies where it is age rather than income that determines how much tax people pay. Can you give us an idea of just how this is affecting younger generations?
Yeah. So income tax is obviously a hugely important way in which we fund the public services which we all use, but there are quite substantial concessions in our income tax system, and those concessions overwhelmingly benefit older Australians, which means that when Grattam looked at this just before the pandemic in 2019, they found that a household that was earning $100,000, if that household was working age, they'd be paying 2.5 times the amount of tax as if that household with the same income per annum was headed by somebody over 65. And that's because of the concessionary treatment that attaches to the income that you get from superannuation, and as well as a number of other concessions in our system that really favour those who have wealth and really work against those who do not.
Should we be thinking about whether those concessions should continue to exist going into the future? Do they need to be looked at?
Look, our argument has been that yes, some part of tax reform is having a look at whether your tax system is working for the circumstances that we are in now. And it may have been, traditionally the idea of tax concessions for elderly Australians has come from a place of equity. But if we actually look at the circumstances now, it is a fantastic thing that many elderly Australians or Australians after retirement age have built up significant savings, but they have also benefited from very considerable tax concessions to the point that is unsustainable and puts a greater pressure on working age Australians to pay for the public services that we all use. And of course, the biggest users of those health services, those aged care services, are older Australians. And so as our population ages, our need to support those services is also increasing.
And so we are seeing reforms to the cost of aged care. Which other areas should be priorities?
So Grattam has long argued for looking at superannuation tax concessions, and the government has made certain steps in that direction. We think there's more ground to travel there. We've also argued that you should look at things like the capital gains tax concession, which is a tax concession that privileges people who, say, sell when they sell investment properties and receive a capital gain. So there are particular tax concessions that we think you can look at to level the playing field in terms of income tax. And the great thing about that is that will also enable us to then think about looking at an income tax system that doesn't weigh so heavily upon people in their working age life. In particular, for particular groups in society, the income tax they experience can mean that their marginal tax rates for that 4th or 5th day of work can be really high, and that has a pretty strong disincentive effect for people working, the number of days that they want to. So we think that there are benefits on the other side of the ledger as well in terms of looking at that tax burden and spreading it a bit more evenly.
Do you think older Australians would accept the premise for change?
Look, I actually think so. I think that ultimately older Australians have benefited from a really strong period in the Australian economy, a really long stretch that was built upon reforms in the 80s, in the 90s. So I think that actually, if they understand the case for it, they'll appreciate that setting that foundation for people to be able to invest in their education, innovate, come up with ideas, run businesses in early stages of their life is important for all of us. And so we should have a system of taxation and public services that support younger generations to be able to do that.
What happens if today's younger generations don't have the same opportunities to accumulate wealth as their parents and grandparents have done, if they believe that the system is indeed stacked against them?
Yeah, look, I think that one of the things that's really important for people to sort of be aware of is that it's incomes and it's wealth. And over the past decade, we have seen that for younger generations, they haven't done better than those who have come before them. And that's always been a bit of an article of faith that, you know, each generation sort of stands on the shoulders of the previous one. But for the generation born in the 90s, they haven't seen that uplift in terms of what they're earning relative to those born a decade before. And so if we don't see that momentum, then we don't necessarily see the same belief or hope in the future, which is a really important motivator and also part of the glue that binds us together. So from the perspective of social cohesion, I think it's really important for younger Australians to feel the sense that they're being afforded the same opportunities that previous generations were afforded, and not feel like they're the ones kind of left carrying the can. And you know, bearing in mind that the younger Australians are well aware that climate change is already upon us, that they know that that is only going to escalate over the course of their lives. And so, you know, I think that they rightfully expect older generations to pitch in for the mission of you know, our future prosperity and our future sustainability.
Aruna Sathanapally, good to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you.